Hey guys, tonight we're crawling deep into the kinds of jobs that even your worst enemy probably doesn't deserve. Picture this. It's the middle of the night in a medieval town. There's a damp fog hanging low, and you poor soul, are inching your way down a narrow stone shaft beneath a public outhouse, ankle deep in human waste. The air is thick with the scent of rot, mildew, and something you hope isn't alive. Welcome to the world of the gong farmer. You probably won't survive this, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your city and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge toward the cesspit with a wooden shovel and a torch stub, the flame flickering like it's nervous for you. Above ground, the world's asleep, but below is your kingdom, a rank, squelching, disease-riddled kingdom of other people's leftovers. Gong farmers were hired, usually in the dead of night, to empty latrines and cesspits before the smell overwhelmed the daylight crowd. There's no plumbing, no gloves, and certainly no health insurance. Just you, a bucket, and a prayer that whatever just brushed your leg wasn't still breathing. The job paid surprisingly well. Some accounts say as much as 6 pence a night, which was decent coin, but it came with absolutely zero prestige. In fact, the smell was so baked into your clothes and skin that people would cross the street to avoid being downwind of you. If you were lucky, you might find a cesspit that hadn't been used in a while, which meant the waste had settled and dried somewhat. If not, you were in for a thick, bubbling stew of human output, dead rats, food scraps, and the occasional medieval mystery. Historians still argue whether gong farmers were technically considered part of a town's sanitation system or just barely tolerated outcasts. Records show that some towns even forced them to live outside city walls. Others allowed them near the outskirts of the market, but only if the wind wasn't blowing toward the noble quarter that you'd lower yourself down with ropes, lanterns swinging beside you, into a cavity barely large enough to squat in. Then came the worst part: scooping. Wooden buckets were filled, hoisted up, and dumped into carts that were then dragged to disposal sites far outside town. Sometimes just into the river, because why not ruin drinking water too? And you know how medieval people loved their walls. Some cesspits were actually built into the thickness of the town walls themselves, like gross little architectural secrets. It wasn't uncommon to hear about accidents. Men who slipped, drowned, or suffocated before they could call for help. You take a moment, breathing through your mouth, though honestly, that's no better. One of your fellow workers swears he once found a half-eaten pie and briefly debated finishing it. You laugh, but not too loud. You're trying not to inhale. A rat skitters past your boot. You don't bother swatting at it. You've learned to live with company. Back up top, someone's waiting with a fresh torch and a cloth soaked in lavender oil to press against your nose for the walk home. It helps a little, not enough. A medieval physician once wrote that the vapors from cesspits could rot your lungs. You believe it. Every cough is a gamble. Still, there's a strange camaraderie among gong farmers. You share jokes, take turns scraping muck off the cart wheels, and tell exaggerated tales of the worst pits you've seen. Like the one behind the tavern where someone dumped a full sheep carcass. Or the noble's privy that was built over an abandoned well. It took 3 nights to empty, and you're still not sure you ever hit the bottom. And of course, there's the superstition. You toss a pinch of salt over your shoulder after every shift, partly to keep spirits away, partly because it's the only seasoning you'll taste that day. Some say if you work the pits long enough, your soul starts to smell, and no priest can scrub it clean. You try not to think about it too much. Before you finish, one last detail. In London, around the 14th century, regulations required gong farmers to work only at night and to be done by morning prayers. If not, they could be fined. Imagine getting fined for being too thorough in your cesspool duties. You heave yourself up the rope ladder, legs trembling, ears ringing from the silence of the pit. Above, the stars have shifted. The cart is full. The air, while still awful, is a little less choking now. You walk home, sludge-crusted boots squishing with every step. No one says a word to you on the road. One boy whispers something and points. You're used to it. You did your job. Tomorrow, another pit, another bucket, another silent descent into the world no one wants to think about while they're sitting on a polished wooden toilet seat. The smell hits you before you even reach the workshop, thick, sour, and unmistakably canine. You pause outside the open door, where steam curls lazily from wooden vats. A dog somewhere barks and you wince, knowing that's probably not a good omen. You step inside, boots crunching on ground littered with old bones and bits of hide. Welcome to the tanner's yard, where beauty begins in absolute filth. You are a tanner now. And your job? Making supple leather from animal hides. Sounds noble, maybe even artisanal, right? That's until you realize every inch of this job is soaked in some form of bodily fluid. You start your day dragging bloody cow skins into soaking barrels filled with stale water and chalk to loosen the hair. Then comes the real magic. Fermenting those hides in a mix of dog urine, animal brains, and dung to soften the flesh. Why dog urine? Because it's full of ammonia, which helps break down fat and tissue. Medieval people figured that out long before they knew what ammonia even was. They just knew it worked. You squish the hide between your fingers. It's warm. That's not a good sign, but it means it's fermenting well. Congratulations. Historians still argue whether tanners were outright shunned by society or just quietly avoided like plague victims without the drama. Some town charters shoved the tanneries to the outskirts for sanitation reasons, which is code for please take your stink somewhere else. Others allowed them inside city walls but required them to operate downstream, far away from drinking water, lest the entire population end up with a side of cholera with their breakfast. You stir a vat with a paddle nearly as tall as you, watching the surface bubble like a cauldron in a witch's hut. The smell is unspeakable. A few minutes in and your eyes begin to water, your nose has given up, and your stomach threatens mutiny. Still, you carry on. The hides must be removed, scraped, rinsed, soaked again, this time in a mixture containing brains. Yes, animal brains, because enzymes in brains help soften the leather, making it easier to work with later. That a coworker tells you, with far too much pride, that every animal has just enough brains to tan its own hide. You nod slowly, wondering if that's true or if he's just lost all sense of reason from prolonged fume exposure. Either way, the phrase sticks with you. The scraping process is backbreaking. You pin the hide to a curved wooden beam and use a crescent-shaped knife to peel off the remaining flesh and fat. You slip at one point and nearly slice your hand open, but no one reacts. Injuries are part of the job, and honestly, your hands are already calloused, cracked, and permanently tinted an odd yellowish gray. Lunch is eaten quickly, sitting on an upturned bucket. You try not to breathe too deeply. One of the apprentices bites into a hunk of bread with dried blood on his sleeve and doesn't even flinch. You're impressed, in a sad sort of way. A tanner's clothes rarely come clean. The stink clings. Your neighbors avoid you in church. Children hold their noses as you pass. And yet, your leather is in high demand, from boots to belts to book bindings, even armor padding. Nobles might wrinkle their noses at your presence, but they can't go without your wares. It's a strange contradiction, reviled by all, yet essential to the smooth operation of daily life. The tools of the trade are simple but brutal. Scrapers, paddles, heavy stones for flattening, long gloves if you're lucky. Most days, your fingers are your tools, and if you lose a nail, well, it'll grow back. Probably. There's even a fringe belief among some folk healers that tanners never get sick. Something about how the constant exposure to foul matter somehow cleanses you. You chuckle at the absurdity as you wipe sweat and splatter from your brow. You've seen tanners with chronic coughs, festering skin infections, and joints so swollen they can't hold a paddle. Cleanse in DWY evening, your arms ache, your feet feel like wet stones, and your clothes are so stiff with residue they practically stand on their own. But the leather is ready to be stretched, dried, and buffed. It's tough, durable, and not half bad to look at if you ignore where it's been. Some tanners develop a strange affection for their work, even pride. You catch yourself admiring a finished roll of leather. It's buttery soft, dyed with crushed bark and iron filings, and it smells less offensive than the yard. You try to convince yourself it's all worth it. You're producing something valuable. You have a skill. Not many people can say that. Still, you know this job shortens your life. The constant exposure to harsh chemicals, natural or not, wrecks your lungs, burns your skin, and clings to your soul. You haven't been able to taste food properly in months. Your skin cracks in the winter and peels in the summer. You sleep lightly because the stench seems to follow you even into dreams. But hey, at least no one steals your lunch out of the communal basket. Perks. You tighten the strap around your apron, the heavy leather stiff from last week's blood. The axe is freshly sharpened, gleaming, but not too clean. There's a crowd gathering at the edge of the platform, faces half hidden under hoods, some somber, others smiling. A few chewing on bits of bread as if watching a public execution is a light mid-morning snack. You step into view, and just like that, everyone pretends not to know you again. You're the executioner. Not a torturer, that's a different gig, though the two often overlap. No, you're the one who ends the story, who swings the blade, ties the knot, or, on occasion, sets the fire. And in return, you get a strange kind of half-fame. Everybody knows who you are, but no one looks you in the eye at the tavern. The job is as old as justice itself, but in the Middle Ages, it gets particularly creative. You don't just behead people. You hang them, draw and quarter them, crush bones, burn witches, drown heretics, and, if you're in a more sophisticated city, operate something called the wheel. Historians still argue whether the job was considered a civic duty or a shameful necessity that towns simply couldn't do without. You're paid well. Very well compared to most folk. But your income is cursed, literally. People avoid taking your coins. Sometimes they cleanse them with holy water or bury them near the church before spending them. You once tried to tip a barmaid and she burst into tears. You walk the scaffold with a professional calm. You're not cruel, not gleeful. This isn't sport. It's craft. If you're good and you are, it's quick. A single blow, maybe two. No mess if you aim right. But if you mess up, the crowd remembers. The victim's family definitely remembers. A sloppy execution might lead to rioting or worse, losing your contract. Your tools are kept sharp and spotless. Most executioners carry their own axe, wrapped in cloth, sometimes passed down from father to son. Yes, it can be a family business. You're also responsible for the block, the rope, and whatever mess is left behind. You clean the platform, dispose of limbs, and sometimes help with dissection if a surgeon is curious enough and rich enough to ask for the remains. Ever heard of the executioner's cloak? It's not a myth. In some places, you wore a specific outfit. Long black robes, maybe a hood, depending on the region. In others, you dressed just like everyone else, only with a silent shadow that followed you everywhere. That shadow? Public memory. Your social life is non-existent. You live on the edge of town, often literally. Some records say executioners were forced to enter the city through different gates than regular folk. Marrying outside your profession was tricky. Marrying inside it meant dinners with people who'd seen more necks than a choir loft. You remember the first time you swung the axe. The way the crowd leaned in, the silence just before the drop. You were shaking. You didn't eat for 2 days. But then the money came, and then the second job. And now, it's just a routine. You even have a checklist. Check rope, check knot, calm prisoner, time the drum roll that there's a myth you secretly enjoy it. That every executioner is a sadist in disguise. But that's not really fair. You've seen condemned men sob like children, sing hymns, spit in your face, or confess things you can never unhear. One even apologized to you before he knelt. That one stuck with you. You've got a few odd perks. One of them is the right to claim certain items from the executed: belts, cloaks, boots. Some towns allow you to keep part of the fee from wealthy criminals, which means you occasionally end up richer than the town scribe. But don't expect gratitude. The butcher talks to you only when he needs bones cleared, and the baker once asked if you could wear gloves when buying pastries. You get the message. Point one quirky tradition you're forced to uphold. After a hanging, you must leave the body for exactly an hour before cutting it down. Superstition. People believe the soul takes time to rise. You sit nearby during that hour, counting birds or fiddling with the rope. Once, a child wandered too close to the gallows. You walked her home, and her parents didn't even thank you. Historians still debate whether executioners were allowed Christian burials. Some say yes, after all, you were just doing your job. Others argue no, since you handled cursed things and spilled blood outside of war. You don't think about your funeral much, but when you do, it's quiet. Closed coffin, small crowd, maybe just a grave marker that reads, "He got the job done," as you wipe your blade with a damp cloth and fold the hood back over your face. The crowd begins to disperse. Another day, another name checked off the list. You descend the platform and vanish down the alley, as you always do. The baker's son stares at you. You nod gently. He flinches. You'll stop by the tavern tonight, sit in the corner, and sip watered ale while the room pretends you're not there. And when you leave, someone will whisper, "That's him." Not "That's John" or "That's the man who helped the widow fix her fence." Just him. You carry that title like a second blade. You wipe your hands on your tunic, but it doesn't help. The slime is everywhere. Under your fingernails, in the seams of your sleeves, even behind your ears somehow. You've been mucking out the privies, and let's just say this is not the kind of career people dream about as children. You are a gong farmer. That's the polite term. A more honest one might be night soil collector, though even that doesn't do justice to the sheer volume and texture of what you deal with. Your job, 6 nights a week, is to climb down into the cesspits beneath medieval latrines and shovel out what's been collecting for weeks, months, sometimes even years. The pits are stone-lined, deep, and often dug directly below a household's garderobe or privy tower. When someone says they need to use the loo in this world, they mean they're heading to a little wooden seat with a hole in it that opens straight down to your office. And what awaits you is a mountain of excrement. Urine, dead rats, rotted straw, and the occasional lost sock or chicken. You don't go in empty-handed. You carry a long-handled shovel, a rope bucket, and a thick cloth tied over your mouth and nose. Not that it helps. The smell still floods into your throat and eyes like an angry tide. It's the kind of stench that seems to rewire your brain after a while. Historians still argue whether gong farmers were considered essential heroes or barely human. Some towns paid them handsomely, while others treated them as untouchables. Either way, nobody invited you to dinner. You work at night, hence the name Night Soil. Fewer complaints that way, and fewer people gagging when you roll past with your cart of... Well, it's best not to describe it again. You load the waste into wooden barrels and haul it outside the town walls to dumping grounds or fields. Oddly enough, farmers are often grateful. Your product makes an excellent fertilizer. There's a fringe belief, especially among the very old, that you are immune to disease, that your exposure to filth somehow purifies your system. You know better. You've seen what happens to your colleagues after years in the pits. Hacking coughs, raw skin, missing teeth, even sudden deaths no one bothers to explain. You remember your first cesspit. The homeowner was apologetic, even offered you a meat pie as a tip. You declined because you were elbow deep in human waste. But the job was honest. No one else would do it, and you needed coin. That's how it starts. That's how it always starts. Sometimes the pits collapse. That's the worst. The stone lining caves in and buries you in a slurry of the worst kind. If you're lucky, someone hauls you out. If not, well, they might just cover the hole and pretend it was never there. There are stories of hidden treasures. Rings, coins, even daggers, lost to the privy hole and rediscovered by lucky farmers. You once found a brooch in a pile and sold it for more than a week's wages. But most of what you find is less pleasant. Rotting bones, broken chamber pots, and once a human finger. You didn't ask questions. The most dangerous part of your night is moving the barrels through narrow city streets. One wrong bump, one jolt of the cart, and the lid pops open. You've had it happen twice. The sound of the splash, the silence that follows, and then the distant retching from a nearby alley. Unforgettable. People pretend not to see you during the day. But if they do make eye contact, it's often with a mix of fear and gratitude. They know you keep the city from drowning in its own filth, that you keep the smells mostly underground. You're part of a strange balance, an unspoken deal where you do what no one else dares, and they pretend it's not happening. Your clothes never really wash clean. You've tried soaking them in vinegar, scrubbing them with lye, even leaving them in the sun for days. But the odor clings, and so do the flies. You've named a few of the regular ones. Still, there are moments, strange, fleeting moments, where you find peace. The city is quiet at night. The stars stretch above you, endless and soft. You roll your cart alone through moonlit streets, every house asleep, every window dark. It's just you, the sky, and your burden. And in those moments, you almost forget the stink. Almost. You once dreamed of being a mason, of carving stone that outlives you. Instead, you empty pits that no one will ever thank you for clearing. But you know what? The streets don't flood with filth. The children don't fall ill from waste-contaminated wells. And someone's got to do it. Might as well be you. Just don't shake anyone's hand. You rise before dawn, long before the first rooster considers clearing its throat. Your breath curls in the early chill as you shuffle into the stalls. Your tools? A wide wooden rake, a dull blade, and buckets, always buckets. You are a tanner, and your job, simply put, is to take dead animal skins and turn them into something usable. Gloves, shoes, saddles, belts, all the essentials. But the process, it's not for the squeamish. The raw hides arrive stiff, bloody, and sometimes still warm. You don't ask questions. Your first step is to soak them for days, weeks even. This softens the tissue, but also starts the glorious journey of decomposition. The vats are huge and shallow, filled with stagnant water, animal brains, and, when supplies run short, dog dung. Yes, that's real. There's even a phrase for it. Pure. Not because it's clean, oh no, but because that's the trade name for aged canine waste. You rub it directly into the hides, with your hands. And yes, it smells as bad as you're imagining. But it works. The enzymes help break down fats and loosen the hair. And then you scrape. For hours, you drag the blade across the skin, shaving off fur, fat, and whatever else you'd rather not name. Historians still argue whether the worst part was the stench or the early death rate among tanners. You'd argue both. The smell of a tannery is legendary. Even back in the day, they didn't try to hide it. Tanneries were banished to the edge of town or downstream, where the runoff wouldn't contaminate the drinking water. At least not immediately. You get used to the odor eventually, the way someone might get used to living beside a battlefield, or in a compost heap. One quirky thing about the tanning process is the use of urine, human urine. It's mildly acidic and excellent for prepping hides. And yes, you used to collect it yourself, going door to door with a bucket, asking neighbors to donate their chamber pot contents. Some cities even had laws requiring households to provide it for free. Talk about civic duty. You often work barefoot, standing knee-deep in the soaking pits, massaging hides, scraping off grime, and gagging only on the inside. The work is brutal on your skin. Your hands are always raw, your fingernails black, and you can forget about ever having a proper meal break. Your lunch smells like your job, that you've lost count of how many tanners you've seen with missing fingers, collapsed lungs, or simply disappearing from work one day and never being spoken of again. One man swore he went blind for 3 days just from inhaling too much of the ammonia-rich air. Another walked into the river and never came back. Some say he just wanted clean socks. The tools are simple but precise. Scrapers, stretchers, racks for drying. You lay the treated hides out to cure in the sun, flipping them at regular intervals like some horrific version of laundry day. The drying yard is where you sometimes sneak a nap, if the flies and the heat don't gang up on you first. Sometimes nobles visit your shop to buy fine leather. They cover their noses with perfumed cloths and act like the goods just grew on a tree. You never correct them. Let them think their fancy gloves came from a silk merchant's orchard, not a dung-soaked pit by the river. One time, a young lord asked you if leather naturally came this soft. You just smiled and said, "Only the finest dogs, my lord. There are a few odd perks to the job. Leather's valuable, and if you don't mind the social ostracism or the skin rashes, you can make decent money. Better than a plowman, that's for sure. And there's a kind of satisfaction in the process. You take waste and turn it into something people want. That's power in a weird way. Still, you're not invited to feasts, not even funerals. One local priest refused to bless your tannery, claiming the place reeked of the devil's pantry. Whatever that means. Children cross themselves when they see you. Dogs howl. And your own family insists you change your clothes in the barn. Historians still debate whether tanners were respected craftsmen or social pariahs barely tolerated for their usefulness. In some places, tanners formed guilds and wielded real economic influence. In others, they lived in shacks made of patched hides, somewhere the wind always blew the wrong way. But there's a strange pride in your work. You walk through town and see people wearing your labor on their feet, cinching it around their waists, or carrying it as pouches for their silver. They don't thank you, but you know. And that's enough to tea the end of a long day. You strip off your tunic, rinse your arms in vinegar, and sit on a stool outside your hut, watching the sun dip low. You smell terrible. You always do. But the leather hanging from your racks is perfect. Smooth, strong, ready for market. Tomorrow you'll do it all again. Soak, scrape, rub, and curse. And maybe, just maybe, find a moment to breathe through your mouth and pretend, for a second, that this is just a regular job. You stand at the edge of a field, staring down at the swollen belly of a dead cow. It's not your cow. It's not your field. But it is, without question, your job now. You are a plague burier, and this week, again, death is your coworker. The job title changes with the years. Corpse collector, death man, burial orderly. But the tasks remain grimly consistent. Your work begins when others' lives end. The moment the telltale rattle of breath stops, you appear like some foul omen in layers of waxed cloth, linen strips around your mouth, and hands wrapped in leather. And sometimes, not even that, because supplies are short and death doesn't wait. You pull your cart through alleys that stink of rot and boiled onions. A clanging bell swings from your side, and you ring it with each slow step. Not out of ceremony, but warning, bring out your dead. If anyone inside is still breathing, they best stay that way. If they're not, you'll be taking them off the bedding. Sometimes with the bedding still attached. A fact most people forget. The dead keep changing after they die. Their skin darkens, their bellies bloat, gases build, eyes bulge. And when you lift them wrong, well, you don't do that more than once. One boy in your team once misjudged a week-old baker's wife. She burst. The sound was bad. The smell was worse. The memory still haunts your dreams. Historians still argue whether plague buriers were city employees, volunteers, or prisoners forced into the role. You've met all three. One was a monk who'd lost his entire monastery. Another was a gambler who thought this gig would be easy money. He made it 3 days. The graves are dug in haste. You dig wide pits, not deep ones. Time and effort are precious. The carts roll up, and with a grim heave, the bodies tumble in like logs. There's no spacing, no ceremony, just stacking. You try not to look at faces. There's one trick you've learned. Chew cloves. Not because it works, but because it gives your mouth something to do besides retching. You once had a friend who sang hymns while he shoveled. A way of coping, he said. After a while, he stopped. Said the songs made it worse. Said they reminded him of weddings and springtime and warm bread. Things you just don't want to remember right now. Your clothing is always damp, sweat, rain, or something worse. The plague doesn't respect personal space, either. You've seen it move from one side of a street to the other in a day. One house untouched, the next emptied overnight. One dog howling into the dark until it, too, lies quiet. Some towns hire watchers. People to stand outside infected homes and mark them with chalk or nail boards across the door. But often, by the time you arrive, the markings are meaningless. The whole street is silent. And when the wind blows just right, it's not silence. It's a sigh. A fringe belief persists that cats spread the plague. Some towns cull them by the dozen. You think it's nonsense. Rats seem the more likely culprit, darting between waste piles and bakery stalls, bold as anything. But who are you to argue? You're the one dragging children out by the ankle. The cart is heavier in summer. The heat accelerates everything: decomposition, despair, and disobedience. Some try to hide their dead, afraid you'll take the body and never return it. Which is true. You never return anything. There's nowhere to return it. To point, one old man offered you a coin to let him bury his wife himself. You agreed, watched as he dug the hole with his bare hands and wrapped her in a tablecloth. When he finished, he lay down beside her and said nothing more. You marked the spot with a stone. You didn't ask questions. Some of your colleagues wear strange masks, long, beaked things stuffed with herbs. The idea is that the smell of mint and rosemary will protect them. You tried it once. It fogged up, you tripped over a cobblestone, and nearly fell into a pit. You went back to your scarf and a deep breath. There's a superstition among the grave diggers. Don't count the bodies out loud. They say it tempts fate, that death enjoys hearing its score. You believe it. You once heard a new guy say 43 while unloading a cart. He caught the sickness 3 days later. When your shift ends, you burn your gloves if you have any. Wash your hands in vinegar if there's some to spare. And sleep far away from others if you sleep at all. People don't look you in the eye. Can't blame them. You're a reminder that they, too, might end up on that cart someday. That the bell could toll for them next. You don't blame them for hating you. You'd hate you too. But someone has to do it. The city would drown in its own dead otherwise. The oddest moment is always the morning after a big burial. When the streets are quiet again. When the sun dares to peek through the mist. And for just 1 hour, the world feels clean. Before the next cough, the next scream, the next body. But until then, you lean on your shovel, roll your shoulders, and wait for the bell to ring again. You sit on a creaky stool, surrounded by dripping wax, soot-stained windows, and the constant, flickering glow of candles that never quite chase away the shadows. You are a full-time medieval candlemaker, And no, your hands will never smell right again at a first glance. It doesn't sound that terrible. Candles are cozy, warm, romantic even, but only if you've never met a tallow chandler, which is exactly what you are. Tallow, for the uninitiated, is rendered animal fat, specifically from sheep or cows, sometimes pigs, whatever's cheapest, really. And it all begins with a big, steaming cauldron of slop that smells like a butcher shop threw up in a fireplace. Most towns don't have a lot of candle makers because not a lot of people want to deal with the reality of turning lumps of congealed grease into light. Historians still argue whether tallow chandlers ranked closer to butchers or blacksmiths on the medieval pecking order, but one thing's certain: nobody liked standing downwind of you. The process is repetitive, messy, and incredibly flammable. You start by acquiring the tallow, raw fat trimmed off carcasses. You boil it down slowly in big iron pots over open flames. Picture the smell of old bacon mixed with wet dog and a hint of despair. That's your workplace aroma, day in, day out. You pour the hot, liquid fat into shallow pans, where it cools just enough to become a sticky, waxy paste. This is where the dipping begins. One by one, you lower wicks, thin cotton strings tied to wooden rods, into the tallow. You hold them there, then lift them out, let them cool a bit, and repeat, and repeat, and repeat. Each candle takes dozens of dips, and that's if the weather cooperates. In the summer, it melts too quickly. In winter, it sets too fast. Your fingers are burned constantly. Your sleeves always smell scorched. Once, you leaned too close and singed off your eyebrows. They never grew back quite right. People often think beeswax candles are the norm in the Middle Ages. Not for you. Beeswax is expensive and saved for churches, nobles, and very lucky monks. You get tallow. You always get tallow. Even the wax scrapings from the altar candles go into a different pile. You're not allowed to touch that. But here's the twist. Your candles are the ones people actually use. Poor folks can't afford fancy wax. They need cheap light that lasts through the dark winter evenings, even if it stinks like roasted socks. You sometimes add herbs, rosemary, lavender, even mint to try masking the odor. Doesn't work. Now it just smells like a barnyard spa. One day, a town noble came to your stall, held up one of your best tallow tapers and said, "It looks like it's made of cheese." You replied, "Smells like it too." He did not buy a candle. Your shop is also, somehow, always greasy. Every surface is slick with residue. You've slipped more times than you can count. Once, you dropped an entire tray of finished candles. They hit the floor like soft sausages, bouncing uselessly into the corners. You wept, quietly, into your apron. Still, your work matters. Candles are life in a world without electricity. Monks need them to read. Midwives need them to deliver babies at night. Merchants need them to count coins long after sunset. Even thieves prefer them. Easier than torches. Harder to spot from a distance. There's a quirky belief in your town that lighting a candle backward will ward off demons. Nobody knows what backward means, but it hasn't stopped 3 separate clients from insisting you dip their candles the holy way round. Sometimes, when you've worked too long without rest, you start imagining the wax figures talk to you as they cool. They don't say anything useful, just mutter things like, "Turn me again," or "It's too hot in here." You keep dipping. You learned this trade from an old woman with hands like tree bark and a voice like gravel. She used to joke that candle makers don't need light. They become the light. Then she tripped into a vat of boiling tallow and nearly proved her own point. She retired shortly after, gave you the shop, left you her favorite apron, stiff with time and secrets. Every week or so, you haul your candles to market. You stack them in bundles tied with twine, label them by size, fat tapers for lanterns, skinny ones for sconces, stubby ones for travel. You stand there smiling like you haven't spent the last 5 days ankle deep in fat. Once, A priest bought your whole stall, said it was for a holy vigil. You nodded solemnly and offered a discount. Then you saw his assistant sneaking one into his satchel with a flask of ale. Vigil, indeed. Historians still debate whether tallow candles were ever used in royal households or whether the smell alone banned them from palaces. Some say in emergencies even queens burned them, but only in sheds, far from their perfumed pillows. By sundown, you return to your shop, arms aching, fingers wax-crusted, boots sticky with drips. You rake the ashes from the fire, hang the last set of rods, and sit in the candlelit haze of your own making. The lights flickering, the shadows crawl, but it's warm and quiet. And just for a second, the smell doesn't seem quite so bad. You duck your head under the low stone archway and step into a space that somehow manages to be colder than outside, even in summer. The walls sweat with damp, the floor is slick, and every breath you take tastes faintly of something old, something acrid. You are a medieval latrine pit cleaner, and today, once again, the cesspit beckons. The Latin term is gong farmer, which sounds almost respectable, doesn't it? Until you learn that gong was a polite euphemism for human waste. As in, he farms the gong. And by farm, they mean shovel it out by hand. You work by torchlight and only at night by law in some cities. Not because it's spooky, though it is, but because nobody wants to see or smell what you do in daylight. Plus, the carts of excrement you haul out, they're not exactly a parade float. Better to trundle them through empty streets under cover of moonlight. Tonight, you've been sent to the back of an alehouse with an especially temperamental cesspit. The privy above is still in use, and there's a not small chance someone might forget you're down here, which is why you wear a thick cap. Not for warmth, for deflection. You wedge your way down a narrow ladder and into the pit. The floor squelches, the ceiling drips, the torch sputters. You begin scooping. It is, of course, entirely by hand. Shovels help at first, but eventually it's just you, your pail, and what feels like the world's worst stew. The smell. Picture a mix of sewage, sulfur, and several decades of regret. You don't gag anymore. That part of your soul shriveled up years ago. Still, sometimes you catch a waft so potent you hear colors for a second. Historians still argue whether gong farmers were paid well or merely tolerated. Records show some were offered bonuses or land exemptions. Others were, frankly, treated like the waste they removed. It varied by town, by year, by how desperate the locals were for sanitation. But here's the surprise. Your job matters more than people admit. Because in towns where nobody cleaned the pits, cholera and dysentery took hold. In places where you toiled nightly, there was just enough cleanliness to keep the worst at bay. They don't thank you for it, but their insides do. The waste you collect doesn't go straight to the dump, either. Sometimes, it's taken outside the city walls and dumped into designated middens. Other times, farmers pay you for it. Yes, really, human waste, once aged and dried, makes halfway decent fertilizer, especially when mixed with animal dung and ash. You just try not to think about where the local cabbage patch gets its nutrients. One colleague of yours swears he found a silver ring in a latrine once. Claimed it was a nobleman's, dropped during some kind of scandal. He wore it on a cord around his neck for years. Then he dropped it back into a pit and wouldn't go in after it. Wasn't meant to be, he shrugged. Every cesspit has its personality. Some are shallow, crusty things that make your back ache with all the bending. Others are deep and dangerously soft. You once stepped too far and sank past your knees. Took 2 hours to dig yourself free. You burned those trousers afterward. The worst are the old cathedral pits. Monks, it turns out, produce a surprising amount of waste, especially when on an all-bean diet. You remember one abbey latrine where the smell clung to your tongue for 3 days. Nothing helped. Not even sucking on mint. Superstitions run wild in your line of work. You're not supposed to whistle underground. Some say it wakes the spirits. Others claim if you drop your lantern, you must leave immediately or risk being swallowed by the earth. You don't argue. You once saw a guy vanish into soft sludge like it was quicksand. No one talks about it, but no one doubts it either. Fringe beliefs claim that wearing a dried toad around your neck prevents infections. You've tried it. Didn't help. Just made you smell worse, which frankly is impressive. You dream of quitting sometimes, opening a shop, selling bread maybe, but then you remember bakers get up even earlier than you do, and their ovens are nearly as hot as your pits are cold. Also, you once cleaned behind a bakery. Not much better. Really, one of your few perks is that you're mostly left alone. Nobody wants to linger around a man with boots soaked in the past 3 generations' digestive histories. Even tax collectors hold their breath when you pass. That's power in a strange way. Occasionally, the city needs a full overhaul. Old pipes repaired, pits bricked over, streets dug up. That's when you're called in by name. They know you've mapped the underworld by heart. You've crawled through tunnels most folks don't even realize exist beneath their feet. Once, you followed a collapsed drain tunnel and ended up beneath the mayor's kitchen. He nearly fainted when you emerged from under the floorboards holding a bucket and a candle stub. You were banned from the district, a small price to pay for one of the best stories in your crew's history. And yes, there is a crew. You meet at the pub after washing thoroughly, and trade tales like old soldiers. You compare blisters, brag about depth and consistency, debate who had the worst week. Someone always wins, someone always loses, but you all share the same smell. After your shift, you rinse in a stream, rub your arms raw with vinegar, and whisper apologies to your boots. You walk home alone, half-numb, torch guttering low. You lie awake a while, the pit smell still in your nose, even when it's not. You dream in browns and grays. And yet, you wake the next night and do it all again. Because someone has to keep the city clean, even if the city prefers to pretend you don't exist. You open the heavy wooden door and immediately wish you hadn't. The stench hits you first, sour, thick, and unmistakably fungal. You've entered the medieval tannery, where cowhide becomes leather, and you are the unlucky soul responsible for making it happen. Tanners are the kind of people you smell before you see. Even your dog avoids you on the walk home. And unlike the gong farmers or leech collectors, your trade doesn't just reek. It stains everything. Your fingernails, your clothes, your lungs. There's a permanent chemical haze in your nose, even when you're asleep. Today, your job begins before sunrise. The hides arrive piled in stiff bundles, often with bits of meat and fat still clinging to them. They're not fresh, not by any humane standard. In fact, many are well on their way to decomposition. You grimace, then grab your scraping knife. First comes the beaming process, which is just a nice way of saying you drag stinking cow flesh across a curved wooden log until all the remaining goo is off. It's a full-body workout, especially in the summer heat, when flies swarm in like they've booked an appointment. Historians still argue whether tanners were considered essential artisans or necessary nuisances. They were often pushed to the edge of town, quite literally. Their work was valuable. Leather was used for everything from boots to book covers, but nobody wanted to live near the process. You carry the scraped hide to the next stage, soaking it in urine. Yes, human urine, collected from chamber pots, donated or sold by townsfolk who were more than happy to pass along their relief. The ammonia softens the skin, making it easier to work with. There's a local boy who comes by twice a week with buckets of fresh delivery. He calls it yellow gold. You laugh, but only to hide the part of your soul that's quietly dying. Then there's the drenching vat, a frothy, brownish soup of water, brains, and lime. That's not a euphemism. You mix actual animal brains into the water. The enzymes help break down the fibrous tissue in the hides. The phrase, use every part of the animal, was never meant to be comforting. The brain mush gets massaged into the hide. By hand, with your bare hands. The smell is thick, eggy, and somehow metallic. One fringe theory claims brain tanning is safer for the skin than lime tanning. You're not so sure. You've got a rash on your wrist that's shaped like the Holy Roman Empire. Then comes the drying rack. You stretch the hides over wooden frames and let the sun do its work. On a breezy day, the whole area flaps like a macabre carnival. Stray dogs wander through, sniffing hopefully. Birds avoid the place entirely. Even maggots know their limits. The worst part? The barking pit. It's filled with tannin-rich liquids made from soaked oak bark and other astringent woods. You lower the hides into the pit and leave them there for weeks, sometimes months. When you pull them out, your arms are stained brown up to the elbows, like you're turning into a tree. Your father taught you the trade. His arms were leathered by the end of his life, both metaphorically and literally. He used to say, "Son, the stink makes you strong." You're still waiting for the strong part. Point one time, a scribe came by to buy parchment and asked if he could watch the tanning process. He lasted exactly 4 minutes before retching into a bucket. He still bought the parchment, just didn't ask where it came from. A quirky tidbit. Some medieval texts claim tanners could predict the weather by how their hides reacted to the bark solution. If the leather curled early, rain was coming. If it stayed flat, sun ahead. It was more accurate than some almanacs. You remember once, during a hot spell, the hides turned green. Not with envy, with mold. That was a bad week. You spent days rubbing salt into every inch, trying to salvage them. By the end, your hands were so cracked they bled every time you moved your fingers. Some tanners turn their skill toward crafting. You've made a few things: belts, bags, a pair of gloves for your cousin. They were stiff and smelled like vinegar, but she wore them proudly. Said they reminded her of honest work. She also kept them in a box lined with rose petals. Tanners weren't allowed in most social events. Not because of status, but because of odor. You once snuck into a festival wearing clean clothes. You made it 30 minutes before someone noticed the scent wafting from your boots. You've tried everything to get the smell off. Vinegar baths, soap made with ash, even crushed mint leaves rubbed into your skin. Nothing works. You could bathe in perfume and still be followed by the ghost of bovine doom. Historians still debate whether the earliest tanners used dung as part of the process. Some sources suggest dog excrement was prized for its natural enzymes. You don't doubt it. You just hope your boss doesn't read old trade manuals. By sunset, your arms ache, your lungs sting, and your boots squelch. You strip off your apron, hardened and stiff from splashes, and hang it on its nail. It thuds like dried bark. You sit for a moment on the bench outside the tannery, sipping stale ale and watching the townsfolk hurry past with hands over their noses. A few children laugh and point. One calls you Leather Ghost. You nod solemnly. The stars peek out above the trees. The breeze picks up. For the briefest moment, the scent of bark and lime fades, and you almost imagine you're somewhere else. Clean, fresh, normal. Then a new load of hides arrives, and your work begins again. You step into the stables, but you're not here to ride. You're not a noble, nor a groom, nor even a stable boy. You've come for something else entirely, the contents of the floor. That's right. You're a medieval muckraker, and your job today is collecting animal dung. Lots of it. The official title might sound almost charming. Muckraker evokes a certain pastoral whimsy, perhaps. But make no mistake, this is dirty work. Not metaphorically, not morally, just flat out, nose-wrinklingly filthy. Your cart creaks behind you as you shovel up a fragrant mix of horse droppings, hay, and urine-soaked straw. all of it fermented to perfection beneath iron horseshoes and pig trotters. This treasure trove of filth doesn't go to waste. Quite the opposite, it's practically currency in some towns. Mixed with ash and compost, it becomes the medieval miracle known as night soil fertilizer. The richer the muck, the better the crops. And your pile? Positively decadent as you scrape the stable floor. A fly lands on your cheek. You don't swat it. You're long past fighting them off. They're part of the team now. Tiny winged coworkers with no sense of personal space. You'll be stopping by the butcher's yard next. That's where the blood, fat trimmings, and offal spill into the gutters and mix with mud. You scoop that up, too. You know just the right blend of cow dung and pig waste to create compost hot enough to melt frost in winter. Historians still argue whether these informal sanitation roles were actually regulated by local law. In some cities, muckrakers were part of organized guilds. In others, they were just freelancers hustling through alleys with a bucket and hope. But either way, towns wouldn't function without you. You smell awful, sure, but every harvest that doesn't fail, that's partly thanks to you. Sometimes people leave out little bundles for you, old scraps of linen, or a heel of stale bread. It's not charity, it's gratitude, because they know what would happen if you ever stopped coming. A quirky fact. In certain parts of France and Italy, manure collectors had the right to enter private stables and barns without permission, provided they left something behind, usually a token coin or an empty bucket, a kind of filth tax in reverse. You tried it once in your village. The farmer didn't understand and chased you off with a broom. You now stick to public areas. Your favorite place is the chicken yard. Not for the smell, heavens, no, but because the droppings are light and easy to bag. It's a break from the back-breaking heft of horse muck. Also, chickens tend to scatter at your approach instead of trying to bite your kneecaps like some goats you could name. You've developed a kind of sixth sense. Muckdar, you call it. You can walk through a street and know, just by sniffing the wind, whether there's a ripe pile waiting behind a blacksmith's forge or tannery wall. It's a gift that nobody else wants. Your tools are simple. A wide wooden scoop, a reinforced leather apron, and a cart with rickety wheels. You had a donkey once, old Gertrude. She helped you haul the cart until she died of old age. You still visit her grave behind the pig pen. She earned it. You've had more than a few near misses. One time, a stack of refuse toppled onto you while you were digging through it. Took you an hour to crawl free. You emerged looking like some sort of mythological swamp creature. The tavern refused to serve you that night, which honestly was fair. Occasionally, you find strange things in the piles. Bits of cloth, lost coins. Once, a broken dagger you swear was cursed. It gave you nightmares for a week. You buried it under the manure pile and told it to stay there. Despite your profession, you've got a sharp mind for chemistry, though no one calls it that yet. You know how long to let dung ferment before it's safe for use. You know that adding wood ash helps kill certain pathogens. You even know how to make lye from it, the base of medieval soap. You're not just a muckraker, you're a rural alchemist in a way. Still, you get no respect. Children throw pebbles sometimes. Adults avoid your shadow. One woman crossed herself when you passed by. You try not to take it personally. It's the scent, not the salt on market days. You wear your second best tunic and do your best to keep the wind at your back. You bring bags of garden feed to the stall, a euphemism that makes nobles feel more comfortable. They won't shake your hand, but they'll pay double for the rich stuff. Sometimes a monk from the local abbey stops to chat. He's writing a treatise on earthly labors and claims your job is metaphorically holy. You work with the lowliest things, he says, to bring life anew. You nod politely. You don't tell him there's a dead rat in your boot tonight. You sleep in a shed behind your uncle's mill. You don't need much. A straw mattress, a small fire, and a barrel of vinegar for rinsing your hands. You've tried bathing in the river, but the fish swim away in droves. Still, you find peace in your work. There's something satisfying about taking what no one wants and turning it into something valuable. There's dignity in dirt if you know where to look. And tomorrow, the cows will drop fresh inspiration. The horses will fill the air with earthy possibility, and your cart will creak back into motion. Point one more day in the life of the man who cleans the world, one shovelful at a time. The bell tolls softly in the foggy morning, and you shuffle out of your narrow room, bones stiff, breath misting. It's going to be a long day. You're heading to the plague pit, and you're the one in charge of digging it deeper. You didn't ask for this job. No one ever does. But when the town ran out of gravediggers, because they, too, succumbed, you were volunteered. They handed you a rough shovel, a coarse sack for your head, and a quiet nod. Congratulations. You're now a dead cart laborer. You trudge through the muddy streets with the cart trailing behind you, its wheels catching on every cobblestone, its wooden bed already smeared from the last load. People turn away as you pass. Some cross themselves. Others whisper prayers. It's not just the dead you're dealing with. It's the sickness that still clings to them. The sweating, blackened bodies wrapped in thin linen or dumped into the cart unshrouded. Their faces often frozen in surprise or pain, or that eerie serenity that's worse than either. You reach the first stop, a narrow alley where a wooden X has been scrawled on a door. A candle flickers inside. The smell confirms your suspicion. You knock once, no answer. You push open the door with your foot. Inside, the family is still. A mother cradling a baby. A man in the corner, slumped with a rosary still tangled in his fingers. You whisper something, words you don't believe but say anyway, and begin the grim work. They go into the cart one at a time. You're careful not to look too long. Historians still argue whether plague dead were always handled with care or whether bodies were simply tossed into pits like rubbish. You like to think you're one of the gentle ones. You arrange them so they don't lie face down. It's the smallest shred of dignity. The pit lies just beyond the town wall. You dug it last week with 2 others. Neither came back the next day. You unload the cart. The linen rustles like dry leaves. You sprinkle lime over the bodies, not out of respect, but necessity. The lime helps with decomposition, masks the stench, and, in theory, slows the spread of the plague. Whether it works or not, no one knows. But you keep doing it. A quirky tidbit. During one particularly bad plague season, towns tried hiring musicians to accompany the dead cart. The idea was to elevate the soul's journey. One bard refused to play after a week, said his lute smelled like death and sang off key. You once sang softly as you shoveled. It helped. Then you noticed the silence afterward felt deeper, hungrier. So now you don't sing. You remember the first time you dropped a body into the pit. It was a girl with a ribbon still tied in her hair, blue like the summer sky. That night, you dreamed she asked why no one kissed her goodbye. You woke up shaking. There's a man who meets you at the edge of the field. He wears gloves, 3 scarves, and a large crucifix. He doesn't speak, just hands you coins wrapped in oiled cloth and nods. Payment, a reminder that you're not doing this out of love. You try to believe it. Sometimes, during the digging, you hit old layers, skeletons from the last outbreak. Some are still in their plague masks. Others are curled into positions of fear. The earth is a time capsule of tragedy, and you are its archivist. You carry with you a pouch of herbs, lavender, sage, rosemary, stuffed into your tunic, a crude attempt at protection. The apothecary swears by it. You're not convinced, but it helps mask the scent. Just barely. You once asked the local priest why the plague comes back. Punishment, he muttered, then quickly added. Or rats, maybe. Historians still debate. You nodded like that was useful. Then you went back to digging point. One of your few friends is a rat catcher. He swears the plague isn't from rats at all. It's the air. Bad vapors, he says, wafting a rag over his face. He has a dozen theories. You've heard them all while leaning on your shovel, too tired to argue. You take breaks by sitting on a stump near the pit. From there, you can see the town's rooftops. Red tiles, crooked chimneys, little plumes of smoke. Life goes on up there. Children laugh. Bread is baked. Bells ring. But not for you. There are days when your hands tremble before you touch the shovel. It's not fear exactly. More like weariness that seeps into the joints and stays there. You flex your fingers, grip the wood, and keep going. Once, a body in your cart moved. Just a twitch. You froze, heart thudding. Then you realized it wasn't the plague. It was a sick man, not a dead one. You pulled him out, gave him water, alerted the friars. He lived. You see him sometimes in the square, limping, selling turnips. He never acknowledges you. Maybe he doesn't remember. Maybe he chooses not to. You've thought about leaving, finding some quiet village untouched by the pestilence. But the road is long, and the sickness travels faster than horses. And besides, who would dig the pits? Night falls as you finish. You smooth the earth, say your half-hearted prayers, and pull the sack tighter around your head. You push the cart back, its wheels groaning like old ghosts. The moon is out. The stars blink. Somewhere a dog howls. The town is quiet, still sleeping. You are the last one awake, the last one who will touch the dead. And tomorrow it begins again. You wake before dawn to a hammering on your shutters. Sharp, deliberate. You already know what it means. There's a blockage in the city's privy drains, and you've been summoned. Again, you throw on your oldest tunic, splash some water on your face, it won't help, and grab your kit. A rusty hook, a stout rod, and a half-mask soaked in vinegar, because that's about as much protection as science has offered you. Congratulations, you're today's cesspit diver. Now, if you're imagining a shovel and a bucket, think again. The blockage is deep, maybe 10 or 12 feet down, which means you're going in. The privy chamber you're called to sits behind a merchant's townhouse. Its stone walls fine, ivy-wrapped, with a carved oak door. Fancy. Inside, however, the air is thick, the stench immediately flattening your senses. You've long since learned not to breathe through your nose. Or your mouth, really. You just suffer. The cesspit is full. Black, clotted, bubbling in places. It's not just human waste in there. It's discarded food, dead rodents, lost jewelry, the odd tooth. The last diver in this pit supposedly found a brooch worth a gold florin and promptly fainted in the process. The ladder creaks as you descend, rungs slick with condensation and worse. Your feet hit the muck. It's knee-deep, warm, and moving, which is never a good sign. You start probing. You find a rag, a shoe, something that might be part of a goose. And then you hit it. The blockage, probably a clot of hair and fat and solid waste, all tangled together like some diabolical medieval pasta. With effort, you jab your rod into the mass, twisting, pushing, trying not to slip. It gives way suddenly, sending a wave of filth sloshing toward you. You close your eyes just in time. Historians still argue whether cesspit workers were among the best-paid laborers in medieval towns. Some records suggest their wages rivaled carpenters or even clerks. Of course, that was assuming they didn't die on the job. The risk wasn't just disease. There were gas buildups, sudden collapses, even drowning. One famous case tells of a cesspit worker in Paris who fell unconscious and sank. His body not found for days. The city held a small memorial. The tavern across the street offered a free drink in his name. That was the extent of his legacy. A quirky fact. In some wealthier homes, cesspits were cleaned by candlelight, with a second man standing above, watching for signs the flame flickered, an early warning system for toxic gases. If the candle went out, you scrambled up the ladder. If you could, you paused halfway through your job to stretch your back, which already aches from crouching. You can't sit. You can't lean. You just stand in the pit, waist deep in humanity's darkest byproduct, and hope the ceiling doesn't cave in. Above you, the merchant's wife calls out something cheery. "Is it going well down there?" she trills. You don't respond. You're focusing on not losing your lunch. Eventually, the blockage clears fully. You feel the level drop slightly as the waste begins to drain through the now unclogged channel, snaking off toward the open town ditch, where it will meander alongside the streets, completely unbothered by notions like hygiene. You climb back up, boots squelching, body trembling. Someone hands you a cloth. Another offers a sip of ale. You down it in one go. You've earned it. Your payment comes in two forms: a few coins and an awkward loaf of rye bread. Generous, actually. You've been paid in fish bones before. Once, a turnip. Back home, you peel off your layers and scrub in a rain barrel until the water turns brown. Your neighbors stay far away. Children whisper when you walk past. But you know something they don't. You know that every clean privy, every flowing drain, every functioning town wall depends on someone doing the work no one else will. Sometimes you find keepsakes, rings, pendants. One time, a bone pipe still playable. You clean them, hang them near your window. Little trophies. Proof you've been where no one dares to look. You've heard the rumors that some monks believe cesspits are a kind of hellmouth, that evil seeps up from the underworld through the waste of mankind. You wonder, standing knee-deep in it, whether maybe they're right. And yet, the strangest part? There's a peace in it. Down in the pit, it's quiet. No one shouts. No one judges.
No expectations.
Just you and the task. You finish the day sore, damp, and deeply aromatic. But when you pass the merchant's wife again, she thanks you. Actually thanks you. And that's rare enough to soften your mood. You nod, lift your tools, and head home, trailing stink and dignity in equal measure. Tomorrow, there will be another pit, another blockage, another plunge. But tonight, you rest. The sun is barely up when a town crier calls out your name. Not your full name, of course. Just the nickname they've given you, the Flayer. Lovely, isn't it? You're not a torturer, not exactly. You're the tanner's apprentice, though that title is generous. What you actually do is strip flesh off animal hides all day. If you're lucky, only animal. You start by opening the workshop gates, the hinges creaking like a dying goat. The stench hits you before you've even stepped inside. It's the kind of smell that gets into your pores, clings to your hair, and whispers into your pillow at night. Around you, racks of skins hang like damp laundry, dripping brine and history. There's an ox hide over the far beam, half curled and covered in white fuzz from leftover fat. You'll get to that soon. First, the new delivery, 10 sheep carcasses. You drag the first one to the flensing bench. The blade you use isn't sharp anymore. Nothing in here is. You press and pull, slicing between skin and muscle, careful not to nick the hide. You'll get docked for every tear. Your hands already ache. It's still morning, there's a rhythm to it. Hook, slice, peel, scrape, repeat. The hide falls away like wet parchment. Underneath, the carcass steams slightly in the chill air. The smell? Imagine wet dog mixed with expired broth and a hint of scorched horn. It lingers. Historians still argue whether tanning workshops were always this gruesome or if some towns managed to organize cleaner systems. Evidence from medieval Florence suggests some tanneries were even zoned away from neighborhoods, but in your case, it's right next to a bakery. You've learned not to eat bread anymore. Once the skin's off, you scrape off the remaining fat and sinew. That's the worst part. It's a slow, sticky process that often brings up worms. Yes, worms, especially in summer. You flick them off without much thought these days. Then comes the soaking pit. The hides go into a brine of salt water, urine, and animal brains. Yes, brains. Tanners believed the enzymes helped soften the skin. Modern science might argue, but medieval practice didn't ask for a second opinion. A quirky tidbit? In some guilds, apprentice tanners had to taste the brine to prove their commitment. Just a dab on the tongue. You've never done it, your master prefers results over rituals. Lucky you. After soaking, the hides go into lime vats. Not for color. These vats are filled with a chalky white paste that eats away any remaining hair and flesh. You stir them with long paddles, the sludge clinging to your arms like angry porridge. Every so often, you lose track of time and skin. Once, you left a goat hide in too long. It dissolved into something resembling cheese. You got whipped for that. The master didn't say a word, just handed you the ruined pulp and walked away. The worst days are the drying days, when the hides must be stretched over wooden frames and left in the wind. You think they smell worse dry than wet, and birds always try to peck at them. You've had full-on shouting matches with crows. They always win. Still, there's an art to the process. After curing, the hides are pounded, rubbed with oils, sometimes animal fat, sometimes fermented fish, and softened by hand. By your hand. Over and over until the leather bends like cloth. The finished pieces are stacked neatly, ready for the cobbler, the glove maker, the saddle stitcher. You touch the final product with pride, tough, supple, warm. All those hours of scraping and soaking reduced to a usable thing. And yet, when you walk through town, people still wrinkle their noses as you pass. They know the smell. They associate it with rot, not craft. You've heard children joke about tanner's disease, some made-up illness that turns your hands black. Not far from the truth, really. You wrap your hands at night now, cloth soaked in vinegar and thyme. It doesn't help much, but it makes you feel cleaner, which matters more than you'd think. Your master once told you that in some ancient texts, tanners were considered untouchable, polluted by death. Others argue they were vital artisans, making goods for knights and nobles alike. Historians still argue about their true place in medieval society. You just keep working. At the end of each day, you scrub down the benches, rinse your tools, and pour out the worst of the soaking pits. The rest gets left overnight to ferment and fester. Sometimes, when the moon is high and the wind shifts just right, you can hear the howling from the butcher's district. It mingles with the groaning leather racks like a haunted choir. You go home with raw fingers, stiff shoulders, and the smell of lime burned into your nostrils. But as you pass the market stalls, you spot a woman wearing a polished leather belt. One you worked on. Maybe you nod to yourself. The work may be disgusting, but it endures. Your morning begins with a banging on the outer wall. Not the kind that announces guests, but the rhythmic pounding of a heavy mallet on old stone. It's your cue. Time to meet the executioner. No, you're not the one swinging the blade. You're the executioner's assistant, a job few people even acknowledge exists. But behind every axe is a pair of hands cleaning the mess. That's you. You shuffle into the square before dawn, cloaked in a long wool coat even though the summer heat is already rising. It's not modesty, it's for the splatter. The scaffold's been prepared. Timber platform, sharpened axe, and a woven basket that's not empty. Not anymore. The last execution was just yesterday. No one cleaned up after. That's your job now. There's a sticky spot near the block, drying in the sun. The smell is thick with iron, but there's something else too. Something you can't quite name, only endure. You pour a bucket of vinegar over it and scrub with straw until your arms burn. Historians still argue whether executioners were truly shunned or secretly respected. Some records suggest they were well paid and exempt from certain taxes. Others describe entire villages where no one would speak to the executioner, not even at market. You don't know which is true, but you do know that when you walk into the tavern, no one makes eye contact. Today, it's not a beheading. It's hanging and quartering, which means more preparation. You help the executioner lay out the ropes, measure the drop, and double-check the knots. There's no room for error. Too short a drop and it's strangling. Too long and, well, there's a reason you now always check twice. You sneak glances at the condemned man, young, maybe 20. He's sweating, twitching, whispering prayers to a saint whose name you've never heard. You try not to look into his eyes. When the time comes, you step back. You don't watch the body fall, though you hear the crack, the soft thud, the murmurs of the crowd. Then comes the aftermath. You climb the scaffold with a cloth and a wooden bowl. There's blood, spit, and worse to clear. You rinse the platform again and again, careful not to slip. Someone in the audience laughs. Not at you, just at death. It happens. The body is removed in parts. One to the city gates, one to the market square, one to the river's edge. One stays here. You help with that too, wrapping, transporting, nailing signs. The worst part, carrying the head. They make you boil it. Not for cruelty, for preservation. A boiled head can last on a spike for days longer, the flesh tightening and drying like parchment. You use an iron pot set over a brazier. It smells like burning shoes and pig fat. You gag. You always gag. A quirky tidbit. Some towns believed that boiled heads could ward off evil spirits, especially if posted near bridges. One town even held a small feast under the spike, toasting the guardian skull. You didn't attend. You were scrubbing the cauldron. You know the names of all the city's headsmen going back 3 generations. You know how many strikes it took to sever each neck. You know that the worst execution in living memory required 6 blows. 6. The assistant that day fainted. You think about him often. You clean the tools next: knife, cleaver, axe. Each must be spotless, not for morality, but for function. Dull blades tear instead of slice. Tearing makes people scream longer. That's bad for business. When you're finished, the executioner nods once. No words. There's a silence between you both that stretches across every morning. You don't ask him why he does this. He never asks you why you stay. You trudge back home, your boots sticky, your coat stained despite your best efforts. Children point. One throws a pebble. You say nothing. You're used to it. You soak your hands in lye, then lime, then rainwater. The skin peels. You don't care. You'd rather lose a finger than carry that smell to bed. And yet, there's a strange pride to your work. This meticulous, vital. The executioner is just a moment. You're the one who makes sure everything ends properly. People don't want to admit your job exists, but they would notice if it didn't. You've heard stories of cities where executions were messy, chaotic, where heads rolled off platforms and bounced into the crowd. You've heard of botched hangings where men flailed for minutes. You've also heard that in some villages, the assistant took over when the executioner died. You don't let your mind wander that you tuck your tools into a linen cloth and hang your coat in the corner. You glance at the shelf. On it, a small wooden token, a hand-carved charm left by someone after your first week. You don't know who placed it there. You've kept it ever since. It's shaped like a dove. Funny thing, after all you've seen, you still believe in symbols. Night doesn't bring rest. It brings rats. You've just fallen into that thin veil between waking and sleep when you hear the familiar scratching behind the wooden slats. You sigh. Another reminder that your final job today waits below ground. You pull your tunic tight and head out under a moon just bright enough to make the streets look washed in bone. Tonight, you're on rat catcher duty, a job many laugh at, but few survive long doing. You know better. These aren't cartoon rats in waistcoats. These are disease-hauling, wall-gnawing, grain-spoiling, baby-nibbling nightmares. And they breed like gossip. The worst infestations? They always start beneath the bakeries and granaries, where warmth, crumbs, and dark corners collide. But tonight, it's the monastery's cellar. One of the monks saw tails writhing behind the wine barrels. You descend the stone steps with a sack in one hand and a mallet in the other. No, not for smashing. That's a messy myth. You trap and drown. Or, if you're lucky, scare them into your wire cages. You set those last week, now it's time to check them. The first one is empty, but gnawed at the corner. The second? 2 rats. One already dead, the other alive and panicked, its eyes glinting in your lamplight like black beads. You don't feel guilt. You feel relief. You get paid by the tail. A quirky tidbit. In some parts of medieval France, rat tails were used as tax payments, proof of civic contribution. A pouch of tails meant you'd done your part for the town's health. It was a kind of currency, sticky and swinging from your belt. The cellar smells of mildew and vinegar, but underneath that, a dry rot you recognize. Rats have built a nest. You kneel behind the barrels, lift a rotting plank, and yes, there it is, a tangled bed of straw, cloth, and bones. Bones. You don't ask what they're from. Historians still argue whether rats truly carried the plague or if it was the fleas riding on them. Some argue it was airborne. Others say it was gerbils from Central Asia. Either way, you've seen what happens when rat populations explode. You've seen whole districts shut down, doors nailed shut with black marks and silence. You once worked in a town that burned an entire tavern just to chase out a nest. The fire worked. So did the flood that followed when the well burst from the heat. You left the next day. Now, you don't bother explaining your methods. You just do the job. Sprinkle powdered sulfur. Set iron traps laced with pork fat. Pour vinegar along the walls. You even chant softly, an old rhyme your grandmother taught you. Probably does nothing, but it makes you feel like someone's listening. One rat tries to dart past you. You swing the sack and catch it mid-leap. The creature shrieks, and you tighten the drawstring. Not bad for a man running on stale bread and half a night's sleep. You carry your wriggling bag outside and toss it into the bucket. The executioner may get stares, but at least his deliveries don't try to chew through the floored iron daylight. Your work is more public. You walk from shop to shop, checking for new signs. Droppings in the grain bins, bite marks on the cheeses, nests in the haylofts. People wave, but only when you're across the street. One merchant complains that you're scaring customers. Another tries to bribe you not to report his infestation. You accept the coin and still make the report. Justice is flexible. After all, by late afternoon, your feet hurt and your back aches. You've caught 12 rats, found 3 nests, and been bitten once. You soak your finger in garlic mash and ash, your own recipe. So far, you haven't gotten sick. YET.AS evening approaches. You head to the dumping pit. It's not just for rats. It's for all manner of refuse. Cracked pots, rotting food, broken tools, and sometimes things better not described. You open the sack and let the contents spill into the dark, the rats tumbling like spoiled apples. Then you sit, just for a minute. You lean against the post, eyes half closed, listening to the distant sound of a lute from some open window. You allow yourself to breathe deeply, not of the pit, but of the breeze rolling in from the hills. It carries the scent of time and rain. You wonder how long you'll do this, whether you'll still be crawling under floorboards at 60, or whether you'll finally have earned enough coin to buy that field on the edge of town. No rats there, just goats, maybe. You'd like goats. Your candle burns low. You light another, and you walk back home.